Free software used to mean worse software. You download the free one, fight with it for an hour, and go back to paying. That's not true anymore. There's now a free version of nearly every AI tool people pay for. The chatbot, the coding assistant, the automation tool, the voice one, and some of them are better than the thing they copied. So which ones actually are? Number 8. Zapier versus N8N. Zapier's job is joining your apps together, and it charges a monthly fee to sit in the middle. But waiting for you in the open source corner is N8N, which does the exact same joining up work, except you can self-host it for free on a machine you actually own. Usually the assumption is that you need the paid tool here, because people treat the catalog of pre-built connectors as a hard ceiling that dictates what you can build. But N8N's own integrations page explicitly headlines connecting anything to everything. They back that claim up by shipping an HTTP request node. So if a service you use has an API, but no pre-built connector exists yet, wiring it up yourself is a small job rather than a wall. It's cheaper, it's way more versatile once you get into it, and that universal escape hatch means the catalog is never the limit. So head-to-head, the free automation tool actually gives up nothing that matters. But if the free tool already wins the round everyone assumes it loses, where is it actually weak? Number 7. Make.com versus active pieces. Since the free side just took the round everyone assumes it loses, the question now is whether that dominance holds when the job takes a slightly different shape. If the connections you need are the ordinary ones, Make.com sits in the middle of your tech stack, acting as a traffic cop to route data from one app to another, which is a task that requires about as much computing power as a digital toaster. Enter active pieces, which is the open source alternative that does the same routing work but gives you a free self-hosted tier you can spin up on your own hardware to cut them out. And if you look at the top end of this market, the enterprise tier for this same job is custom priced by companies like Workato, meaning the expensive version is priced on corporate contracts and sales calls rather than the computing it takes to move the data. So the head-to-head verdict here is a straight swap, because for those ordinary connections, the paid middleman is doing nothing you can't do yourself. But while routing basic data workflows turned out to be replaceable, you have to wonder what happens when the job involves generating a realistic human voice instead of passing a text file back and forth. Number 6. Paid voices versus the free ones. If your workflow involves generating a realistic human voice, the standard premium services are all going to bill you by the word, which might look cheap on a landing page, but turns into a standing cost the second you try to scale up to long-form audio. So the obvious question is whether a free voice model running locally on an ordinary laptop can sound as good as a hosted service that charges you every time it breathes. Well, it turns out it can, because the open source side has built up a roster of text-to-speech engines that run natively on standard hardware, and they sound good enough that industry license audits are treating them as a working professional category. Reviewers are tracking local setups governed by things like the Koki public model license right alongside the commercial giants, and that's mostly because the fidelity gap has vanished. These free models can hit the same emotional cadence as the paid ones without ever sending a text file to the cloud. So the two sides have landed close enough on sound quality that the invoice is the only difference left between them. But if a free local model sounds identical to a premium service and runs on the machine you already own, is there any reason left not to use it? Number 5 is the voice cloner that's free to download right up until the exact moment you try to earn a living with it. The answer to whether you can just swap out your paid voice service for a local one lives inside the licensing agreement for Koki XTTS, which is the model everyone grabs when they want premium text-to-speech without the premium invoice. They distribute their weights under something called the Koki public model license. And that sounds open and developer-friendly until you look at the text and realize it limits you to only non-commercial use. So you can use it to make your smart home read the weather to your cat, but you can't use it for paid client work or drop it into a monetized video. and you definitely can't wrap it in a clean UI and charge people a subscription for it. And just in case you were hoping to generate the audio and then play dumb, the agreement covers the model and its outputs, which means the actual generated file sitting on your hard drive is legally toxic to your business. The barrier that ultimately stops you from replacing a paid tool with this free one has absolutely nothing to do with how good the software sounds, because a simple line in a text file is doing all the work of keeping you out of the commercial market. But if a standard license can quietly trap the files you generate locally in legal purgatory, what else is a free tool making you agree to? Number 4 is the autonomous coding agent. The pitch from the paid tools is that they charge you a monthly fee for the promise that you can just type a prompt, walk away, and come back to a finished app, like you've magically ascended to tech management. But you don't actually need to pay for that loop anymore, because you can just grab a permissively licensed alternative like Goose or OpenHands, with OpenHands stepping in as a free AI-driven development agent that takes the exact same task on itself. And unlike the closed alternatives, it is published entirely under the MIT license, which means you control the environment and you don't ever have to worry about a startup abruptly pivoting into enterprise pricing. So if we are just asking whether the free agent leaves you with less work than the paid one, this matchup is honestly a draw. The problem is that while the automated coding loop transfers perfectly, the reviewing work does not, because whichever side writes the code for you, a human still has to sit down and read every single line that comes back. The agent finishes the work on its own, but who is checking that what it wrote is any good? Number 3, Cursor and the coding agent job. The answer to who is checking that code is you, which means when an AI takes over the actual job of writing and editing your software, you need to make absolutely sure you actually own the final result. If you look at the repositories for the options people reach for now, opencode is built as an open source coding agent, and it sits right there under the MIT license, while peers like Klein and Ader run on Apache 2.0, which is a different label but the exact same kind of permissive license. This matters because unlike the voice cloners we looked at earlier that hit you with a non-commercial clause the second you try to monetize, a permissive license means you can change the tool and sell what you build with it. You have the rights to take the feature the agent wrote for you in the terminal, ship it to production, and sell it to a client without worrying about one specific editor suddenly snapping shut on your work. So on a pure rights basis, these open tools take over the coding agent job entirely, because you keep your existing rights and nothing gets in the way when you try to sell your software. You own what you build with it. But does owning it matter if the free tool writes worse code? Number 2 is code autocomplete, which brings us to the simplest job on the market, because the entire assignment is just finishing the line of code you've already started. When developers reach for a tool like GitHub Copilot, that autocomplete job is usually all they're actually after. So if you want to pull that exact workflow in-house, you swap it for Tabby, which is published right now as a self-hosted AI coding assistant that you just run on your own hardware. And that self-hosted label is the whole ballgame here, because it means your private code is never boxed up and sent out to somebody else's server to be processed. Instead, you just download the weights and let it watch you type, which gives you the exact same inline ghost text you're used to without treating your proprietary backend like a public radio broadcast. At this point, Tabby completely matches on the job it's given, and since the code never leaves the machine you control, what the subscription still sells is really just somebody else running it for you. The code absolutely stays inside the building. But all of this is completely useless if a suggestion engine you host yourself can't finish a line as well as one somebody else runs. Number 1 is ChatGPT itself, and rebuilding the tool that started this gold rush takes 2 separate free parts, because the app you're paying for is just 2 different jobs wearing a single trench coat. The first job is the underlying engine that manages the weights and runs the models on your own hardware, which is what Ollama is built to do. It's the standard for spinning up local models, and it's published under the MIT license, meaning you control the runtime without any corporate restrictions catching you out later. But Ollama is just the backend, and unless you enjoy typing your daily prompts into a bare terminal like a crypto miner from 2021, you still need a comfortable place to talk to it. That's where the second half of the stack comes in with Open Web UI, which is a self-hosted web interface designed to plug into your local engine. It gives you a user-friendly AI interface that recreates the chat window you've been trained to expect, right down to the chat history on the side. So instead of relying on one company to do both jobs, stacking these two free parts together gives you the same chat product running on a machine that you own. The chatbot is now yours to keep, but owning the engine is only half the battle, because a hosted chat interface is useless if the free model you drop inside it isn't good enough to be worth having. The truth about the free models is they're slightly weaker than the hype suggests, because tracking from Epoch AI measures the best open models as trailing behind the closed frontier. They lag by roughly 4 months, meaning the free model you download today is last season's premium model. And that capability gap is real. It's a measurable deficit that'll bite you on the hardest reasoning tasks. So a free model will still choke if you ask it to untangle a spaghetti codebase left behind by a junior dev who just discovered design patterns. But that small lag is why the open source wins on this list were possible at all. If the free models were still generations behind the ones you rent, wrapping them in a nice chat interface wouldn't make them write good code. The gap is real, but it's small enough that the free tools can handle the ordinary, daily work of a generalist developer. Which means if the open tools are already matching the closed ones on almost every normal job you give them, why is anyone still paying for a subscription? The answer is that free software is never actually a discount, because it just moves the cost from a monthly invoice to your own hardware and your own free time. Take the local model runners we looked at, where a head-to-head breakdown like Ollama versus LM Studio shows exactly how this trade works. LM Studio is free to download and allows commercial use, but because it's closed source, when they promise that no data leaves your machine, you just have to take their word for it. Whereas with an open alternative like Ollama, the codebase sits right there under an MIT license, so you can actually verify that privacy promise yourself. The catch is you're the one configuring the firewalls and making sure the server stays online. So when you pay for a subscription, you aren't really buying the AI model anymore, because the open weights have already closed that gap, which means what you're actually paying for is the hosting, the finished connections somebody else built, and a real company to take the blame if something breaks. The money buys you convenience and a clear legal contract, which means the decision to switch is just about how much back-end work you're willing to take on. So if the open tools match the closed ones on raw capability, but push the liability back onto you, out of those 8 pairs, which ones do you actually cancel? So if the raw capability is a match, the decision of which of those 8 subscriptions you cancel comes down to what you were buying in the first place. Because when the paid product is just a monthly fee wrapping an open model in a nice web interface so you don't have to look at a terminal, the free stack takes over the job. And the reason the cancel list is as long as it is comes down to the fact that Ollama is published under the MIT license. That means the engine downloading and running models like DeepSeek on your own hardware has no commercial restrictions attached to it. But where the paid tier survives, it's because the subscription sells you something a local download can't hand you. If you need the right to earn money off a voice clone and the open model restricts you to only non-commercial use, or you just want somebody else to carry the hosting bill and take the blame when the server goes down, you keep paying. Which means across the board, you were never buying the software. You were buying hosting, permission, or somebody else's finished work. And only 2 of those survive once the models are free. And that implies there's one underlying rule that decides every future tool you look at, not just the 8 on this list. Anyways,